Hi, I'm Ash. I'm a social scientist, and if you're new here, welcome. I make videos about sociology topics, and occasionally I make vlogs. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a social psychology phenomenon known as the bystander effect. So, let's get into the video. Before we get into the video, I just want to do a little bit of a disclaimer / content warning. Some of the stuff discussed in today's video might be distressing to some viewers, so I will do my best to censor some things, but I just want to let you know there might be discussions of essay and some true crime cases. Because of YouTube guidelines, I will have to censor some words, so I apologize for that, but I don't want to get banned from YouTube. Anyway, let's talk about the bystander effect. So recently over on my Instagram, I put up a poll asking what you guys wanted to see next on my YouTube channel, and everyone put the bystander effect. So here we are. And if you'd like to read along, you can check out my blog over on ashycakes.com. That's got heaps of resources and readings as well. Okay, so let's start with what is the bystander effect? So, according to Wikipedia, the bystander effect is a social psychology theory that states that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim in the presence of other people. This theory was popularized by two social psychologists, John M. Darley and Bibb Latané, in 1968, and these two psychologists became interested in the bystander effect following the death of Kitty Genovese. But don't worry, we will talk about that soon, and I apologize if I get names wrong. I try my best. So Darley and Latané created a series of experiments that paved the way for one of the most replicable, I think I'm saying that right, experiments in social psychology. So the experiments went something like this. A participant is either alone or among a group of other participants. An emergency situation is staged, and the researchers then measure how long it takes for participants to intervene, or if they intervene at all. Results found that the presence of others largely inhibits helping. In 1969, they also staged a different experiment where a woman was in distress. Participants were either alone, with a stranger, or with a friend. 70% of the people who were alone called out or helped the woman. But when they were paired with a stranger, only 40% helped. For the friend pairs, it was also found to be 70%, but the researchers emphasize that there are twice as many people who are able to intervene in that instance. They say it may be that people are less likely to fear possible embarrassment in front of friends than before strangers, and that friends are less likely to misinterpret each other's inaction that are strangers. If so, social influence should be less likely to lead friends to decide there is no emergency than strangers. It's likely that friends who already know each other are more likely to be able to interpret each other's thoughts or non-verbal cues more easily, and if one friend says, "Oh, we need to get help," or help them, then the other friend might go, "Okay, let's do that." Khan and Darley also said the following about strangers. Attempting to interpret what they had heard and to decide upon a course of action, they often glanced furtively at one another, apparently anxious to discover the other's reaction, yet unwilling to meet eyes and betray their own concern. This could be to do with the fear of being judged by the other person. They also claim when an emergency occurs in a large city, a crowd is likely to gather. The crowd members are likely to be strangers, and it is likely that no one will be acquainted with the victim. To generalize these results, it's less likely that a stranger will intervene in a large crowd, as usually they think that someone else has already intervened or helped. And if they themselves intervene, then they might be causing more trouble. There are also variables that may impact the bystander effect and who intervenes in certain situations. Latané and Darley believe that this is sometimes to do with how the bystander might ask for help. So, for example, if the victim gave their name to someone they're asking help from, the helper is more likely to help, or people were just more likely to help in general. And if subjects asked for like a dime or a coin, if they explained that their wallet had been lost, 72% of people were more likely to help them out. However, if they just asked for a coin or a dime, fewer bystanders were of assistance, so less likely to help. So what led to all this research into the so-called bystander effect? Well, we have to talk about the murder of Kitty Genovese, and trigger warning for M word that I just said before. So now we're going to talk about the death of Kitty Genovese and media inaccuracies. So this is kind of the case that led to interest in the bystander effect. On the 13th of March 1964, around 3:15 a.m., 28-year-old bartender Kitty Genovese was essayed and stabbed to death outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. Kitty had left work at a local bar around 2:30 a.m. and drove home in her red car. As she was waiting at a traffic light for it to change, perpetrator Winston Mosley spotted her from his car. He was sitting in his parked Chevrolet Corvair. Kitty arrived home, she parked her car and she headed towards her apartment building. And as she did so, Mosley came out of his vehicle. He had followed her home and parked around the corner. He approached Kitty with a hunting knife. It's not a real word, but you know what I mean. Kitty ran towards the front of her building when she noticed him chasing her. He ended up overtaking her and attacked her 2 times in the back. Kitty screamed, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, help me." One neighbor shouted, "Leave that girl alone," and then Mosley ran away. Kitty made her way towards the rear of the building where she found no witnesses and a locked door. Mosley then got into his car and he left, but 10 minutes later he came back. He shadowed his face with a hat and went searching for Kitty. He found Kitty, who was barely conscious, and she had come across a locked door, as I said before, that had prevented her from going inside. Mosley then attacked her several more times, essayed her, and stole $49 from her. These attacks went on for at least 1 hour and a half, and it appeared that Kitty had attempted to defend herself as she had wounds on her hands. Following the second attack, one neighbor came out and found Kitty and held her until an ambulance arrived. I will get into this in more detail below, but some people had attempted to call authorities when they heard Kitty's cries. However, as the 911 emergency system had not yet been implemented in New York, and it wouldn't be until 4 years later, the calls weren't considered urgent, and this just makes me so angry. Kitty passed away at 4:15 a.m. on the way to the hospital in an ambulance. Why did this case lead to what we know today as the bystander effect? Well, 2 weeks following this crime, the New York Times published an article that claimed there were 38 witnesses who either saw or heard Kitty's attack, and none of them intervened or called authorities. And this case prompted so much research into the bystander effect. However, further investigations into the New York Times article found that the article reported major inaccuracies about the case. That is, there weren't actually this many witnesses, and police reports from the case did in fact show that many people had attempted to call authorities. According to Wikipedia, one witness to Kitty's attack said that his dad had called the police following the first attack, and that he said a woman was beat up but got up and was staggering around. And another witness named Carl Ross, who saw the second attack, called his friends about what to do, and then he called the police. I'm not sure how they called the police, if there was no emergency number, but I'm glad that they did try. Because people believed that no one tried to help, we got the bystander effect, also known as bystander apathy or the Genovese syndrome. In 2016, the New York Times called their own reporting on the case flawed and suggested that the original story grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses and what they had perceived. In regards to the perpetrator Mosley, he was found a few days later and arrested. He spent the rest of his life in prison and passed away there. And I don't want to give much more detail on him because obviously I think the victims are way more important in true crime cases, and it's not the point of this video. We want to remember Kitty and we want her to rest in peace. It's just really sad that she had a whole life ahead of her and it was taken away. Manning, Levine, and Collins, 2007, argued that although the New York Times article claiming there were 38 witnesses to the crime was entirely misleading, it paved the way for Latan and Darley to delve into the dynamics of intervention in emergencies and other scenarios, leading to the concept of the bystander effect. The authors also criticized the inclusion of the number of witnesses in psychology textbooks, noting that despite the inaccuracy of this information, it has contributed to insights into human behavior, particularly in crowd situations. So, if this misreporting didn't occur, would we still have as much knowledge on the bystander effect as we do today? And now I want to talk about some other real life examples of the bystander effect, and some of these are very prolific crimes. Some of them are to do with SA, so if you want to, you can skip this section but yeah, just content warning for this stuff. So I believe I have 3 real life examples. So the first is Jane Doe of Richmond High. On the 24th of October 2009, around 9:30 p.m. in Richmond, San Francisco Bay, California, a female student who went to Richmond High School was essayed by a group of males in the school's courtyard while the homecoming dance was being held. In the school's gym. The victim was invited to drink with a few classmates and a few others, all aged around 15 to 40. She was propositioned for, you know what? And when she declined, she was essayed by a foreign object on the concrete for over 2 hours. It's so awful and I'm so sorry. Alcohol was also poured down her throat and she was found to have almost fatal levels of blood alcohol. Allegedly, 20 people saw this attack. And some of them even videotaped it on their smartphones or phones in general, which is just absolutely disgusting. And none of these bystanders called the police. However, after the attack, one person called for help, which I don't understand how that can go on for so long and no one helps. So 6 men ended up being imprisoned for this. Only 4 of them pled guilty and the other 2 did go to trial and were found guilty. The victim also received a $4 million settlement from the school district in 2011, and yes, that is very, very hard to digest and absolutely awful, but that is one example of the bystander effect. So the next real life case is Raymond Zack, and this case kind of has conflicting reports, but this is what we know from Wikipedia. On the 30th of May 2011, which was Memorial Day in the USA, 53-year-old Raymond Zack from Alameda, California, walked into the waters of Robert Crown Memorial Beach. He stood neck deep in water for about 1 hour, and he was around 150 yards from the shore, or 137 meters if you prefer to use the metric system like me. So his foster mother, Dolores Berry, called 911 saying that Raymond couldn't swim and he was trying to drown himself. Police and firefighters responded to her call, but none of them entered the water. The police thought that it was the firefighters' job to enter the water, but they said that they didn't have the correct training or that they didn't have any funding for training in these situations. But apparently there was a memo that contradicted their claim about lack of funding. And allegedly the Coast Guard also sent out a boat, but it either didn't get there or went too far. But I'm not 100% sure if there was ever a boat. So lots of people were watching from the shore and only one person was going to go in. When she started to take off her shoes, she was told by police not to go in and to let the authorities handle it. Eventually, Raymond collapsed in the water due to hypothermia, and by then it still took another 20 minutes for someone to enter the water. A woman ended up pulling Raymond's body to shore, and unfortunately he passed away in the hospital later that day. And to me, this case is really, really sad. Like, why why would you not help in this situation? And why is it when someone tries to help, they're overruled by authorities? What are you supposed to do in that situation? Listen to authority or disobey police orders? I feel like people could have easily helped save Raymond if someone just went out there and asked what he was doing, because what on earth? But may he rest in peace. There was also a lawsuit in 2013 that claimed that public safety officials had no legal duty to save Raymond. And I feel like this case just keeps getting worse and worse. Someone should have saved him. Like, to me, if someone is in danger and couldn't swim, the right thing to do would be to help, right? Okay, and the last real life example, another trigger warning for essay. So this is Jane Doe of Philadelphia. On the 13th of October 2021, a female passenger was essayed by another male passenger on SEPTA's Market Frankford line in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so on a train. This attack occurred around 9:20 p.m. and the male harassed the female for 30 minutes while she tried to push him off her. At 9:53 p.m., the male perpetrator ripped off her pants and essayed her for 6 minutes. There were several witnesses and no one did anything to help. No one tried to intervene and no one called authorities. It wasn't until after the attack that another worker boarded the train, noticed something was off, and called 911. The perpetrator was arrested 3 minutes after the phone call, and many scholars and social workers believe this case was an example of the bystander effect, which is just awful. Like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. So moving on now to why it happens. Now that we've taken a look at some examples, why does the bystander effect happen and continue to happen? Why do people not intervene when there's an emergency? Why do people feel less pressured to help when there are others around? So here are some factors. The first one is diffusion of responsibility. According to Verywell Mind, diffusion of responsibility is a psychological phenomenon in which people are less likely to take action when in the presence of a large group of people. When other people are around, the responsibility shifts and we think, oh, that person is over there, they will help. Or why does it have to be me? There is less pressure on ourselves when there are others around. The next factor is social pressure. Some people think that they are going to be judged by others for helping, so they just don't help. This is known as evaluation apprehension, the fear of unfavorable public judgment. And the third factor is pluralistic ignorance. This is the belief that when people see that no one else is helping, then it must not be an emergency, and people are less likely to intervene if the situation is ambiguous, i.e. unclear. Can we prevent it? Well, there are a few ways. Let's explore. How to reduce the bystander effect. So we can't always prevent it in every single situation. Sometimes people just suck, and that's awful to say. But there are things that we can do to help prevent it. One of these is just being aware of the bystander effect in general. So if we see something is off or think something is off, we can either call for help or we can intervene. We can educate each other on what it is so that people know about it. Another example that I learned back in my undergrad days at psychology is if there's an emergency in a crowd, or say someone collapses or something like that, point to someone and say you call 911, 111, 000, whatever the country's emergency number is, and they are more likely to call because you've singled them out and given them like a job to do. We can assume responsibility for something, and according to the APA, there are 5 Ds to help us. So this is a correct quote on what to do. 1, distract. Try to diffuse the situation or cause a distraction, such as making a commotion or engaging a person in small talk to disrupt the harassment. 2, delegate. Ask for help in intervening, ideally from a person of authority. In an emergency, people should call 911 or the country's own emergency line. It's from the APA, so it's going to be 911. Document, if it is safe to do so, and if the person in need is receiving help, take a video or photo or write notes on the situation and people involved. Number 4, delay. If possible, check in with the person who is the target of the incident and offer assistance or support. And 5, direct. If the target of the incident and everyone else is safe, speak out against the harasser and their behaviour. And if you weren't aware of these things, now you are. The bystander effect isn't just limited to emergency situations either. It could be you see a person fall over, hear a scream nearby, or see someone with bruises on their arms, which could be DV. Human behaviour is very, very interesting, but I think it's super important that we should be aware of things like this so we can help where we can and minimize the bystander effect overall. That's where I'm going to end the video. Thank you so much for watching this video about the bystander effect. I hope you have learned something new, or you've got some more information you can go and educate your friends on. Just tell someone. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with all your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ash. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!